What are the 100 greatest movies of all time? Well, I'm going to go through a list today. Welcome to the Adam Kiss Show, and without further ado, let's get right into it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Adam Kiss Show. Today, we have a very unique episode for you because I'm going to go through the 100 greatest movies of all time, at least according to one list. And I'm going to be going through, seeing what I agree with, what I disagree with, what I would put higher, what I would put lower. And the list that I decided to go with was the AFI list of the 100 greatest movies of all time. And I haven't gone through every film on the list to see if I've seen them all, so there might be some things I haven't seen. But the reason I chose this list instead of IMDb was because as I scanned over it, I noticed that I agreed with many of the choices. So whereas with IMDb, I was going through the list and I would disagree with almost every choice they had. So I'm going to go through the list and we're going to see. It's exciting for me too. I love to talk about these things, to debate different kinds of movies. One thing that I noticed with the AFI list also is that they're mostly older movies on that list, which I totally agree with. Personally, I'm very much into older movies. I love older movies, and I believe that we really should go back to a lot of traditions in older cinema. I feel like in a certain way we may have lost our way in the modern era. And that's why generally I would say a lot of the greater movies have been made in the past. So without further ado, let's get right into it. I have my computer pulled up right here with the list, and number one on the list of the AFI 100 greatest movies is Citizen Kane. Could not agree more. That I'm in total agreement with that. Citizen Kane is one of the greatest pieces of art of all time. It's really where you see cinema becoming a true art form, just in the way that Michelangelo created a painting or a sculpture and it was art. It's the same can be said for Citizen Kane. Often movies are thought of as a lower art form than books or poetry, but I think when everything comes together, it can truly be an incredible work of art that compares with all the great masters of any real art form. So Citizen Kane, directed by Orson Welles, co-written by Orson Welles and Mankiewicz. I know there's some debate on exactly how much writing either of them did. Of course, we were not there, so we do not know, but absolutely incredible screenplay, an incredible direction. I know Gregg Toland was the cinematographer in that production. He really helped Welles, realize his vision. And the reason that Toland wanted to work with Welles actually is a funny story. It's because he said, you don't know what you can't do because this is your first real film. I believe Orson Welles may have experimented with a tiny bit of film before then, but this was his real first feature film, I believe. And, you can see behind the scenes photos of them, having the camera at shoe level in the floor. They had to build sets higher so that they could have the camera underneath. It was one of the first times that, ceilings were heavily featured in a film, which was incredible. I know that the ceilings are actually, I believe they're actually sometimes made of cloth even. But it doesn't seem so unusual to us now, but in those days, showing a ceiling was, taboo. It just wasn't done because that's where the lights were, that's where microphones were, and so it caused all sorts of problems. But really, it was just about getting through those problems and making a very innovative piece of cinema. So much for Citizen Kane. Number two on the list is The Godfather. Now, I probably would have put Casablanca there. I think that Citizen Kane and Casablanca are probably my top two favorite films, and honestly, those two are interchangeable. I mean, one day I may say Citizen Kane is the greatest movie ever made, another day I may say Casablanca. Citizen Kane is definitely more showy in terms of what it can do technically and stuff. It was more innovative, perhaps in that technical aspect more so. And whereas Casablanca, it doesn't bring as much attention to itself with the camera work or everything, but it's all done perfectly. I really can't imagine a movie that's... In other words, Casablanca is one of those movies that I don't think we can live without. Perhaps even more so than Citizen Kane. It's just, everything blends together so perfectly. The camera work, the direction, which is... Michael Curtiz was not what you would call a star director or an avant-garde director. I mean, he certainly was a star director in the sense that he did so many great movies that we all know and love. For the studios, he was an absolutely incredible director, but people don't consider him as much of an innovator or for him to have like a distinct style, which I think is actually harder to do. He did a wide range of different kinds of movies. He experimented with different styles, and a lot of people consider him the top director of the studio system, if you know what I mean. That he was the epitome of the studio system and directors of that era. You know, how they collaborated with others, and how it wasn't like, for example, a Scorsese, who you always know it's a Scorsese movie, or all those directors like that, like Tarantino, where you watch something and you know, okay, that's a Tarantino style. It seems to me like Curtiz, he would fit his style to the subject matter, which is absolutely interesting to me. So I would put Casablanca. Now, the third movie they have here listed is Casablanca, so that's probably where I'd put The Godfather, or somewhere on that list, somewhere in that area of the list, I should say. So The Godfather, absolutely incredible movie. Francis Ford Coppola directed it when he was 29, I believe. It's really, already by the 70s, you know, we were entering sort of a modern era of cinema. And that movie was shot very much, The Godfather was shot very much in the old style of cinema. So it was, you know, very much shot like a movie from the 30s or 40s, like a Technicolor movie from the 30s or 40s, I should say. And it uses all those dissolves, those fade outs, etc., that had kind of gone out of fashion. And then, you know, the story, a great story, you know, it's some kind of version of King Lear, basically, you know, with the aging patriarch of the family. And it's very symbolic, you know, about the journey of Michael Corleone, how a man becomes what he ends up becoming in those movies. And I'm definitely a person who prefers Godfather 1 over Godfather 2. I think they're both great movies. It's just, for me, there's not even any comparison whatsoever. Godfather 1 is far superior from a simple story standpoint, from really everything. I know that people love the more technical things, perhaps, in Godfather 2. But very rarely, I would say that I like a sequel of a movie better than the original. I know that Godfather 2 ended up winning Best Picture, which was a big surprise, you know, for a sequel to win Best Picture. That's very rarely happened, I know. I know there's probably a couple of other examples of that, but that's the only one that really springs to mind for me. So there's Godfather, which is an absolutely incredible movie. Now, fourth on the list here is Raging Bull. What do I think of that? I think probably, for me, it's an incredible movie, but it would probably be lower on the list. It's definitely not my favorite movie. I appreciate it with my head more than my heart. I think it has one of the greatest intros in film history, those opening credits scene to the Cavalleria Rusticana intermezzo. I believe that's what the classical music there is. I think that's one of the most incredible scenes. He's there in the arena, and for me, it was always very symbolic, like he's fighting himself. So definitely a great movie. And number 5 on the list here is Singing in the Rain. Oh, what can I say about Singing in the Rain? Probably the greatest movie musical of all time. Gene Kelly, Debbie Reynolds. There's not much I can say that hasn't been said before. I love the movie. Probably not my favorite movie of all time, but certainly in the top 20, I would say. I think it definitely deserves a spot as number 5. 100% justifies that. Very innovative in terms of, it was directed by Stanley Donen, absolutely one of my favorite directors. Doesn't get enough credit, I know. And just an all-around great movie. Number 6 on the list, Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind, wow. I mean, I remember first being introduced to that when I was a kid. It's an absolutely incredible movie. I don't know what to say. I mean, I was always a big fan of Clark Gable as a kid. I like sweeping epics of all kind. So again, Gone with the Wind is all about that big storytelling. It's a huge story, incredible cinematography. They were using, I think, all the Technicolor cameras they had at the time, which is, again, I don't know what to say. It's an incredible piece of art. That's really all I can say. So for number 7, it's Lawrence of Arabia on this list. I would have put this movie earlier. Lawrence of Arabia is an absolute work of art. I mean, what can you say? It's the story of T.E. Lawrence. It's based on a true story. He wrote The 7 Pillars of Wisdom, upon which it's partially based. Directed by David Lean, my all-time favorite director of all time. Of all time, I should say. I cannot say that enough, that he's my favorite director of all time, without any doubt whatsoever. He did these huge stories. The cinematography is amazing. These locations that he did are amazing. And then earlier in his career, he did some amazing smaller scale movies like Brief Encounter, one of my favorite Leon movies, in addition to Bridge on the River Kwai, Dr. Zhivago, which I'm sure that they make it on the list somewhere. At least I hope they do. So yeah, I mean, those are my thoughts of, I mean, Lawrence of Arabia, it was shot really in the desert on location. They spent a lot of weeks doing it. It was definitely over a year production, happened for over a year, I believe, which is an incredible feat. I think it's really one of the greatest accomplishments in all of cinema, in terms of story, in terms of the way it was filmed, direction. It's all great. I mean, I believe I read somewhere that David Lean tried to make most of the motion on screen go from left to right to show as much of a journey as possible, literally visually. So it's even those kind of thoughts. I definitely think like that, but it's great to think other great directors have thought like that as well. So let's see, number 8, Schindler's List. Great movie, absolutely love it. Probably I would have put it a little bit lower on the list, simply not because it's I don't like it, simply because there's other movies that I would probably love even more, but absolutely great movie. Definitely one of Spielberg's masterpieces. So let's see what's next. Vertigo. I probably would have put this as number 3 or 4 on the list. I've already talked in length about Vertigo, how much I love the movie. It's really one of Hitchcock's masterpieces. There's really not much I can say about it, aside from the fact that I love it. It's with Jimmy Stewart, Kim Novak. The music, Bernard Herrmann's score in that is absolutely incredible. It's not really a film noir. It's kind of maybe I think what people call fairy tale noir. It kind of has its own genre, and that it has certain noir elements. Jimmy Stewart plays a detective. There's a lot of mystery, but then there's also a lot of suspense, and Hitchcock famously gives away a lot of the mystery, funnily enough, within the movie. So that's so much for Vertigo. After Vertigo, next on the list is The Wizard of Oz. Absolutely great technical achievement. For some reason, I've never personally connected with The Wizard of Oz. It's definitely not one of my personal favorite movies. It probably wouldn't make it on any of my top lists, though I appreciate what it did for the industry, what it did technically for filmmaking. For some reason, I just never connected with it on a personal level, like I did with so many other great movies. So that's just my personal taste. Next one, City Lights. That's Charlie Chaplin's masterpiece. Absolutely deserves a place. Next is The Searchers. Interesting about Westerns for me. Generally, I don't like Westerns. I always say that there's 3 Westerns that I love. And that's High Noon, Shane, and I guess The Searchers. So it would be those 3. And the funny thing about that is that all 3 of those, they're Westerns, but they're really about more than they're about. And that's really what so many great movies are. They're about more than their genre or their subject matter. They're, deeply symbolic, and you don't really have to love a Western to love those movies. So totally agree. All right, next, Star Wars. I've actually never seen Star Wars. Very proud of that, but I know it's a great movie. From what I hear, from what it did, it totally changed the industry. Obviously, there's a before Star Wars and after Star Wars. It influenced countless movies out there. So again, I'm sure it's a great movie. I just haven't seen it personally. I've never really had a desire to. I am very much not a fan of science fiction, I should say. I love certain science fiction things, like I know there's Forbidden Planet, which is really a remake of The Tempest set in the future. So I do like that movie, but as a genre, science fiction and horror have to be definitely on the bottom of my list. All right, so next is Psycho by Hitchcock. Definitely not my favorite Hitchcock. I love his other stuff more, To Catch a Thief, North by Northwest, Vertigo. So I've never been a big Psycho fan, but I've obviously seen it. I appreciate it, and I think it's a great movie. Next, 2001: A Space Odyssey. Now, this one is also one of those that everybody loves, but it's maybe not my cup of tea. It's definitely not my favorite Kubrick movie. Once again, it's one of those movies that I appreciate with my head more than my heart. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say about it. Next, Sunset Boulevard by the great Billy Wilder. What can I say? It's a masterpiece. Definitely one of the greatest movies of all time. With William Holden and Gloria Swanson. It's really an incredible noir. It has those very memorable voiceover narrations from Holden. Again, not much more I can say, just that it's a great movie. Anyone should check it out. Okay, next is The Graduate at number 17. What can I say about The Graduate? It's an absolutely iconic film starring Dustin Hoffman. It also changed the game. It's definitely a big inspiration for me. Not one of my absolute favorite movies, but it's definitely up there. And it's a movie that I appreciate in every way. I love the movie. And yeah, it has that iconic ending where it's the big climax of the ending and they get on the bus. And this is such a famous scene, I'm sure you've all seen it. But and then the camera just stays on them as their energy slowly deflates and they don't know what to do. And from what I hear, the director simply wouldn't tell them when he wanted to cut. So those were real awkward moments that they were filming, and it's so great. All right, what's next? The General from 1927. I actually haven't seen it, but I'll definitely check it out. On the Waterfront from 1954 with Marlon Brando. Great movie. Not my favorite, but absolutely great movie with starring Marlon Brando, directed by Elia Kazan. Obviously, there was a lot of controversy with Elia Kazan, and the movie was very symbolic for him. Again, I love the movie. It's just probably not in my top 20. All right, what's next? It's a Wonderful Life. Yeah, love the movie. Probably doesn't make my personal top movies list, but absolutely iconic movie with Jimmy Stewart, Christmas movie. And yeah, let's move on. So next one, Chinatown. Oh, this definitely deserves a place in the top 20. It's at 21 here. I would say it deserves a place earlier for me. It's a neo-noir, but many people consider it greater than some of the actual noirs. Incredible script, often considered one of the greatest screenplays of all time by Robert Towne. Great direction, great starring turn from Nicholson. And yeah, that's what I have to say about that. Next is Some Like It Hot, directed by Billy Wilder. Now, interestingly enough, Some Like It Hot is one of those movies that, I don't know, I don't feel it's Billy Wilder's best movie. I don't believe it's Marilyn Monroe's or Jack Lemmon's best movie or Tony Curtis's best movie. It often gets, put in these greatest movies of all times list. I would consider so many other of Billy Wilder's movies to top that movie, and I'm a big Billy Wilder fan. For me, Some Like It Hot is just very much kind of a nothing movie. Don't get me wrong, it's absolutely still incredible. I just feel that there's so many other movies that are absolutely better, even with all those stars. From all of their film catalogs, there's so many better movies, in my humble opinion. Not taking anything away from it, of course, it definitely deserves recognition. All right, so after that, The Grapes of Wrath from 1940. Yes, great movie. E.T. the Extraterrestrial, no arguments there, one of Spielberg's best movies. Then To Kill a Mockingbird, yes, with Gregory Peck. He won the Oscar for that. It's a great book, great movie. Then Mr. Smith Goes to Washington with Jimmy Stewart. Now that's an interesting one. Yes, I believe I saw it once many years ago. It probably deserves a rewatch. But yeah, I don't remember too much from it. I saw it probably over 10 years ago. Maybe I'll recheck it out and give my evaluation on that. All right, next is High Noon. I already mentioned High Noon as one of my favorite Westerns. Very deeply symbolic. Love it, love it, love it. All About Eve. Interesting one. Yes, it definitely deserves a place. I probably wouldn't put it this early. I'd probably put it later towards the 100. But I would say it definitely deserves a place in the top 100 movies of all time. Double Indemnity. All right. Yes, I recently saw this movie for the first time, so it's still fresh in my mind. I somehow avoided seeing it my entire life, but it's that's another Billy Wilder movie. Very dark, especially for that era. It's surprising that it got made. This really dark, gritty movie. It's with Fred MacMurray and Barbara Stanwyck. He plays the insurance agent, and she plays the woman who wants to get rid of her husband. So there's a lot of great tense scenes in there, very much ahead of its time, and absolutely love the movie. Next is Apocalypse Now. A lot of great stories about production from that movie. It was really a nightmare to film. Francis Coppola put a lot of his own money into it. He had a lot of troubles with Marlon Brando on the set, not knowing his lines, wanting a very high cost for his brief time on set. Also, some of the sets were, I believe, wiped out in storms. So very difficult production. Ended up being a great movie. And yeah, that's all I have to say about it. And the next movie on the list is The Maltese Falcon. What can I say about The Maltese Falcon except that one of the greatest movies of all time, I believe it was John Huston's directorial debut. It's really an incredible noir starring Humphrey Bogart, one of Bogart's first leading roles before Casablanca. It really paved the way for both Huston and Bogart, and really for the genre of noir as a whole. A lot of people consider The Maltese Falcon to be the first or one of the first true noir films, at least in America. All right, so next is The Godfather Part 2. Already talked about that. Great movie. Definitely not as great as the first one for me, but definitely a great movie. Next is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1975, also with Jack Nicholson. A very symbolic movie. I absolutely love it, so absolutely deserves its place. Next, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Yeah, I believe it was the first or one of the first animated features, the first feature from Disney. Incredible movie. Not much more I can say about that. It really started Disney on the world map. It really created the company that we know as Disney. Had it been a failure, we might not know of Disney today. Next, Annie Hall by Woody Allen. I absolutely love that movie. I think it even deserves to be earlier on that list. I mean, it's from a cinematography standpoint and everything, it's a very rough movie, and it's kind of into this strange genre of realism but surrealism. Like, the camera and everything is very realistic and you have these long takes in the scenes, but then there's also these surreal moments. So it's really an incredible mix of the two. Absolutely one of my favorite movies of all time. I mean, Annie Hall, it's just a masterpiece. It's the writing, the acting in it, everything really came together to make that movie a big inspiration. It's really not everyone's cup of tea, I know, but I love it. I particularly love that ending and that wide shot by Lincoln Center in New York. And really, you know, I would also put Manhattan. I'm not sure if the movie Manhattan is somewhere on the list, but I would also put that in there somewhere if it isn't already. So next on the list is The Bridge on the River Kwai, another David Lean movie. Absolutely love it. Very deeply symbolic. Yeah, it's just a great movie. Next is The Best Years of Our Lives at number 37. It's a movie that I appreciate with my mind, and there's a lot of great emotional moments in there too. But again, it's maybe not one of my favorite movies, but it's one I can appreciate. I believe they had the same cinematographer as on Citizen Kane, actually, Greg Toland. So that's very interesting. All right, next on the list, Treasure of the Sierra Madre. Absolutely one of the greatest movies of all time. Love it. Also with Huston and Bogart. Really one of Bogart's best performances of his life. Next is Dr. Strangelove. Again, not one of my favorite Kubrick movies. In terms of Kubrick, I actually love Barry Lyndon, which is a controversial choice for Kubrick. The Shining is also a great movie of his, in my opinion, and others as well, but I'm not as much of a fan of Dr. Strangelove or Clockwork Orange. I can appreciate them, but I am not as much a huge fan of those particular movies. But Dr. Strangelove, that's where Peter Sellers plays so many different characters. A great movie still. Next is The Sound of Music. Yeah, I believe this movie gets very underrated so often. It's really an incredible movie musical. It is much more successful than the stage version. I'm a big fan of Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews, honestly, and I think they did an incredible job. Next, King Kong. I believe I saw it, when I was a kid, the original version. I haven't seen it in a while, so I probably need a refresher on that. And after King Kong is Bonnie and Clyde. This is the one with Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway. It was very, I believe that they were very innovative for their time. There's a story that Warren Beatty tells of how for the gunshots he tried to emulate the movie Shane, by having the sound effects. So the way they did it was to shoot the gun into a garbage can and to get that echo. So that's just a little tidbit that I remember from that. Next is Midnight Cowboy. I'm not familiar with that movie actually, so I'll definitely check it out on my list. Next is The Philadelphia Story, starring Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. Love it. Next is Shane. I've already talked about that. I would probably put it earlier. Next is It Happened One Night. Love the movie with Clark Gable, Claudette Colbert, one of the first romantic comedies. It's just a masterpiece. Next is Streetcar Named Desire. what would I say? I would probably put it in the top 100, maybe not this early on in the process. It's a great movie, but I would probably put it later on. Next is Rear Window. Definitely not my favorite Hitchcock film. I prefer so many others, but a great movie nonetheless. It uses just a few locations very well. So great movie. Okay, next is Intolerance from 1916. Not so familiar, so I'll put it on my list. And next after that is Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring. So disclaimer here, I haven't seen any of the Lord of the Rings movie in a similar way to Star Wars. So I'm not going to pass judgment there. Next is the original West Side Story from 1961. Absolutely love the movie, so no argument there. Next is Taxi Driver. I believe that's probably my favorite Scorsese movie. Maybe Goodfellas is another one. But it's probably the masterpiece of Scorsese for me. A very big influence for me. Okay, so after Taxi Driver is The Deer Hunter. I've seen it. This movie has a lot of hype around it. It was perhaps not something I related to personally as much in my personal taste, but I can appreciate what a great movie it is. Okay, after this is MASH from 1970, the movie, which I believe was starring it's not starring, but directed by Robert Altman. Very interesting that I actually haven't seen the original movie. I've seen some of the series that followed, which I know was disavowed by, I believe, the filmmaker. But that's definitely on my list. All right, next is North by Northwest, and I think this movie deserves way more credit than it gets. I think it should be much higher on the list. It's kind of really set the tone for so many action thriller movies. It set the tone for James Bond movies in particular, and I absolutely love it. Next is Jaws by Steven Spielberg. It definitely changed cinema forever. It really started that whole idea of the summer blockbuster. Next is Rocky, written by and starring Sylvester Stallone. What can I say about Rocky that hasn't been said? It's a great movie. Next, The Gold Rush from 1925. Again, not familiar with that. Nashville from 1975. Not familiar with that as well. I believe that was also directed by Robert Altman, if I'm correct, but I may be incorrect on that. Next, Duck Soup. I believe that's the Marx Brothers. Haven't seen it. And Sullivan's Travels, likewise, haven't seen it. American Graffiti, haven't seen it. So that's 4 movies in a row that I haven't seen. 4 or 5, actually, which is surprising. Next, Cabaret. Great movie musical. Love it. Network. Yes, I believe that was in the same year as Rocky. And those 2 films won a bunch of the awards that year. Network is a great movie. It's a satire. Paddy Chayefsky was the screenwriter, I believe. Incredible screenplay, incredible movie. All right, next, The African Queen. Oh, I love that movie, starring Humphrey Bogart with John Huston again, with Katharine Hepburn. Then Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah, absolutely. Love the movie. It's a great movie. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, starring Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. Now, personally, it's not as much my cup of tea, though I love Richard Burton. He's definitely a big icon. I've looked up to him for many years, and Elizabeth Taylor as well. So love the people in it, maybe not my favorite movie. Next, Unforgiven with Clint Eastwood. I believe that's one of Clint Eastwood's last Westerns. It's a great movie. I think it definitely deserves its spot. Next is Tootsie from '82 with Dustin Hoffman. I believe it was Pollock was the director for that. Correct me if I'm wrong. And it's starring Dustin Hoffman. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting movie. I've seen it many years ago, so I probably need a refresher on that to give a judgment, but I'm sure it's a great movie. Next is A Clockwork Orange from 1971, I believe. This is one of the Kubrick movies, probably one of my less favorite Kubrick movies. I just don't relate personally to it as much, but I obviously appreciate it as a work of art. Next, Saving Private Ryan. Probably not one of my favorite Spielberg movies personally, but it's one of those movies that I appreciate, but is not one of my personal favorites. So definitely deserves to be on a list though. It has that incredible opening battle scene, which really inspired so many action scenes after it. So it really was a milestone in filmmaking. Okay, next is Shawshank Redemption. I saw it about a year ago for the first time. I thought it was a great movie. Definitely, I think it's here listed at 72. I think that's definitely fair. I know some lists have it near the top of the list. I honestly think that that's really a good place for it. It tells a story through many years. It's definitely not among my top favorite movies of all time, but I would say that it definitely deserves to be on the list of 100. Okay, next is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Wow, this movie should be in the top 20, 30 movies ever made. I just love the cinematography, that whole raindrops falling on my head sequence. I love that. I know that nobody thought that would work, but somehow it did in that wonderful sequence on the bike with Paul Newman and Catherine Ross. William Goldman is one of my favorite screenwriters. He wrote the screenplay for this on spec after doing a bunch of research, so absolutely love the movie. Next, Silence of the Lambs. Yeah, this is again one of those movies that I appreciate. I appreciate what it does. I appreciate the impact it's had. It's just not my personal cup of tea. It hasn't really had an impact or inspiration on me as a filmmaker personally. But I absolutely appreciate what it is, and it was a great performance by both Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster. Okay, next, In the Heat of the Night. I actually have not seen it, but on my list. Next, Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump, yeah. Interesting. I would say it is a great movie. I'm not sure if I would think of it offhand in terms of greatest movies ever made, but I'll think about that in the future too. I mean, I've seen it obviously. I think it's a great movie. It's just a question of if it should be on the list of 100 greatest. So next, after that, is All the President's Men. Yeah, not my cup of tea generally. I've seen it. I appreciate it for what it is, but not for my personal taste. Next is Modern Times. I have not seen it. I believe that's Charlie Chaplin, but I'll take a look. Next, The Wild Bunch. Yeah, great movie. I know that Tarantino called that one of the perfect movies out there. In addition to other movies like Back to the Future and things like that. You know, when he was talking about he said that there's perfect movies and they may not be your cup of tea, but there's not really much you can say against them. So I think that's definitely one of those. The Apartment by Billy Wilder. Yeah, absolutely great movie. Next after that is Spartacus. Oh, this should be much earlier, much earlier. One of the greatest movies ever made, one of my favorite Roman epics. Okay, after that is Sunrise from 1927. I'm not familiar with that. Then Titanic from 97, the James Cameron movie with DiCaprio and Winslet. Yeah, I think unapologetically, it's really incredible what they managed to accomplish. It's an emotional story, it's an epic story, it has a little bit of everything, absolutely deserves its place. Next, Easy Rider with Jack Nicholson. Have not seen that one, so definitely on my list. A Night at the Opera with the Marx Brothers. Have not seen it, but it's on my list. Platoon with Oliver Stone. Haven't seen it in a while. I have seen it. I would have to look at it again, but I'm sure it deserves its place. Next is 12 Angry Men. Yes, absolutely. It probably deserves to be even higher up. Incredible premise, incredible movie with Henry Fonda. Next, Bringing Up Baby with Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. I believe it was directed by George Cukor. Interestingly enough, his last name is Hungarian, so it's really pronounced Cukor in Hungarian. He was of Hungarian descent, lived in the United States, obviously, and he was an incredible director of the Golden Age, directed so many great movies like Bringing Up Baby, The Philadelphia Story, and even My Fair Lady, I remember he directed. So yeah, great director, great movie. Next is The Sixth Sense. I have not seen it. After that, Swing Time, yes, with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, I believe. Incredible movie musical. Next is Sophie's Choice with Meryl Streep and Kevin Kline, I believe. Have not seen it, but I'll check it out. Next is Goodfellas. Yes, absolutely incredible Scorsese movie. Followed by The French Connection. Oh, so innovative. Love William Friedkin. He did so many great movies. Very underrated. Next is Pulp Fiction by Tarantino. Now, I mentioned Tarantino and I talk about him a lot because we're both writer-directors, but he could not be... That's kind of where the similarity ends. I appreciate all his work, but we could not be more different in terms of our style, what we like, etc. I think that Tarantino and I could have a great conversation on filmmaking, and a very intelligent one, and we would probably disagree on a lot of things, and we'd agree on a lot of things too. For example, I love Hitchcock, him not as much from what I can tell. I love those kind of golden age movies from the 40s, 50s, early 60s, which he would say is kind of a repressive time. And he liked kind of things from the later 60s, early 70s. And then he, I know, disliked a lot of things made in the 80s. So he has a very particular set of tastes, just like I have a particular set of tastes myself. Like, I'm not as opposed to a lot of movies that were done in the 80s, even though they were maybe under more studio control. There's always moments where more independent things can get made, and then moments where the studio cracks down more on certain things. So that's definitely true. So what's next here on the list is Pulp Fiction. I've seen it. It's one of those movies that is not personally my style or my cup of tea, but I appreciate what it did for cinema. It was definitely a big changing force for cinema. So that's really all I can say about it. Okay, next is The Last Picture Show from 1971. Haven't seen it. Do the Right Thing. Haven't seen it. Blade Runner. Have seen it recently. It's called a neo-noir, kind of set in the future. Again, it's one of those movies I can appreciate, but it's not one of my personal favorites. Next, Yankee Doodle Dandy from 1942. Have not seen it. Toy Story. Haven't seen it since I was a kid, so honestly don't remember much. And finally, on the list, they have Ben-Hur. I mean, Ben-Hur definitely deserved to be in the top 30 or 20 movies, I would say. This was a real injustice that it's only at 100 here. One of the great epic movies of all time, a great Roman epic, and just a great movie overall, starring Charlton Heston, directed by one of the great directors, William Wyler. Okay, that was definitely a lot in one go, but that's my review of the AFI Top 100 Movies list. And it's possible that in the future I may review some of the other top 100 movies, or not, or I may go through what my top 100 movies are. But again, this does not reflect what necessarily my favorite movies were, but I just kind of went through giving my opinion on this list and all the movies in the list. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks so much for watching. Definitely follow me on all the social media platforms, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, all the social media platforms. And we'll see you next time on another episode of The Adam Kiss Show.